Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. And in this next segment, the realization that it has been 6 months since Russia invaded Ukraine and the fighting is continuing. And there's still tensions and worries over the nuclear power plant in the Ukraine that is still currently under siege, and other things are going on in the world that are holding tensions up, and we need to find peaceful solutions to conflict so that we don't have to worry about the threat of nuclear war, that we don't have to worry about the threat of hunger because of shipments of food being held up, farmers being threatened, things like that. Along with that, one of the most important things that we should be paying attention to is education. And we're going to hear a briefing from the one director from Education for All, as she gives a report on what is happening in the world with those who are missing out on education. They're missing out on opportunities, and they are missing out on things that children are being left behind because of the area and the lack of education. So we're going to hear from Yasmine Sherif as the director of Education Cannot Wait, and she is also one of the directors in the UN's global initiative to enhance education for all students, both girls and boys, on a equal basis. So let's listen in to what happened with the United Nations with a press briefing, and then Yasmine Sherif is going to be the guest into the press room.
Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. Excellent. Our guest will be Yasmine Sherif, the Director of Education Cannot Wait, the UN's Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crises. Yasmine will be here to speak to you about the launch of their new annual report, which highlights key results achieved for crisis-affected girls and boys. Do want to flag that at 3 p.m. this afternoon in the Security Council, Rosemary DiCarlo, the head of the Political Affairs Department, will brief on situation in Ukraine and around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We'll try to get you those remarks ahead of time. Turning to South Sudan, the UN mission in the country today said it is concerned about the safety and security of thousands of civilians who are caught up in recent clashes between rival armed groups in Upper Nile State. The UN mission noted that fighting in and around Tonga town that began on the 14th of August has displaced over 15,000 people, while flooding is hindering their access to humanitarian aid and safer areas. So far, more than 200 of the displaced persons have sought refuge in the UN protection of civilian sites in Malakal, which is the capital of Upper Nile State. Many children are reported to be missing or separated from their families. To help address the situation, the UN peacekeeping mission is engaging with the impacted communities and also with the government and local authorities to quell tensions and support efforts towards a peaceful solution. Furthermore, the mission is supporting the movement of humanitarian organizations and deploying additional peacekeepers to the UN protection site to increase security and mitigate the risk of spillover fighting. The UN mission calls on all parties to respect international law and safeguard freedom of movement for humanitarian organizations in Upper Nile State. Staying in the Horn of Africa, the UN Children's Fund today said that children in the Horn of Africa and in the Sahel could die in devastating numbers unless urgent support is provided, as severe malnutrition and the risk of waterborne disease collide. Catherine Russell, the head of UNICEF, warns that across the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, millions of children are just one disease away from catastrophe. The agency says that the number of drought-hit people in Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia without reliable access to safe water rose from 9.5 million people in February of this year to 16.2 million in July, putting children and their families in increased danger of contracting illnesses like cholera and diarrhea. According to WHO's latest data, already more children die as a result of unsafe water and sanitation in the Sahel than any other part of the world. And in northeast Nigeria, our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that the number of severe acute malnutrition cases being admitted to treatment facilities has risen by over 30% compared to the same period of January of July last year. With the lean season underway, up to 4.1 million people are projected to face acute food shortages in the Northeast, and malnutrition situation is quickly deteriorating. Our colleagues say that some 8.4 million people in the northeastern states will need humanitarian aid in 2022. In the first quarter of 2022, we, along with our partners, have reached 1.8 million people with assistance in the Northeast. 1.3 million people received water, sanitation, and hygiene assistance, and nearly 50,000 benefited from services to address gender-based violence. Our humanitarian colleagues in the field warn that without immediate funding, the situation could deteriorate sharply over the coming weeks, marking the peak of the lean season. The 2022 humanitarian response plan, requiring $1.1 billion, is currently only 37% funded. And staying in Africa, but moving south, in Eswatini, the UN team there, led by resident coordinator George Wachira, continues to strengthen Eswatini's responses to the impacts of multiple crises, including COVID-19, as well as Cyclone Eloise and civil unrest that took place in June of this year, and most recently the war in Ukraine. With the support of UNICEF and the WHO, the Ministry of Health has vaccinated 33% of the population for COVID-19. UNICEF and UNESCO have contributed over $7 million towards making teaching and learning accessible to all children, including through diversified remote and web-based learning platforms. The Cash for Work initiative by the World Food Programme through the Ministry of Public Works is creating labor-intensive employment in communities to alleviate poverty and food security among 340,000 people in need of humanitarian assistance. And the FAO and WFP's homegrown school feeding initiative is enhancing efficiency and access to nutritious, safe food for school meals produced by smallholders, farmers in Eswatini. And today, the UN Refugee Agency noted that this week marks 5 years since more than 700,000 Rohingya men, women, and children fled Myanmar for Bangladesh, joining hundreds of thousands of other Rohingyas who have sought and found refuge in the country in previous years. UNHCR says the latest exodus from Myanmar is now officially defined as being a protracted situation. And today is the International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its Abolition. Audrey Azoulay, the head of UNESCO, stressed that it is time to abolish human exploitation once and for all and to recognize the equal and unconditional dignity of each and every individual. Today, she said, let us remember the victims of freedom fighters of the past so they may inspire future generations to build just societies. I will end on a little quiz for you. Today, this member state paid its dues in full. It's the country that is home to the oldest clock in Central America and the second oldest clock in the world. The clock, which was constructed around 1100 AD by the Moors, hung in the Alhambra Palace in Granada and is now situated in the Immaculate Conception Cathedral in this country. Nope. Nope. It's not even Central America. Oh my God, this is so, I mean, you know what? You get no questions for a week. No, it's in Honduras, and we thank our friends in Honduras for paying their membership in dues in full. Betul.
Thank you, Steph. I'll start with Ukraine. Yesterday, you said that you needed assurances for the safety of UN personnel to go and conduct the investigation. Since both parties, Ukraine and Russia, agreed to the establishment of the fact-finding mission, why can't you get the assurances? Is it the Ukrainians? Is it the Russians? What makes it hard?
I mean, once
for you?
the discussions are ongoing, once we feel that we have the level of safety for the staff from both parties to go in, we will make that announcement.
And has any of the parties said that we're giving you assurances?
Once we have assurances from both parties and we feel it is safe enough, they will go.
And then can I also follow up on the Horn of Africa? You said that children may die in devastating numbers unless urgent support is provided. What are these urgent needs? Is it the money for the World Food Program get all these needs?
It is cash and funding to address the what we call kind of a multi-dimensional crisis, because it's not just food, it's access to safe drinking water and public health as well.
And how much are you asking for?
I'll check with UNICEF. Yep. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. As you know, tomorrow is the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I know the Secretary General, the 6 months
yes.
anniversary. Pardon me. I'm moving too fast. I know the Secretary General is going to be at the Security Council. Is there any chance that he can stop and talk to us at all, and is he going to be issuing any kind of a statement?
Well, I mean, I think the statement he will deliver tomorrow will be the statement on the 6-month mark of this this phase of the war, and I think he will mark the tragedy for civilians in Ukraine, the death, the displacement, the destruction that they have suffered for the last 6 months, and I will ask him to stop and just say a few words. Edward.
Hi, Steph. I have several questions. First, on the tragedy of Darya Dugina. Yesterday, you said there need to be an investigation, and then the Russian investigators have already said that they identified the suspect as a Ukrainian woman. Does the UN accept this investigation?
It's not for us to accept or reject. I mean, this. I really have nothing more to say than what I said yesterday.
Okay, so more questions on Korean Peninsula, because starting yesterday...
Korean or Korean?
Korea Peninsula.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so yesterday the U.S. and South Korea started what they called the biggest military practice in years, and some people just fear it would accelerate the tension in the peninsula. What's the UN's response?
Well, I mean, we would hope that it does not aggravate the tensions on the peninsula.
And also we know that in the past few months, the DPRK accused South Korea. They said after the investigation, they found the COVID-19 pandemic inside DPRK is originated from the balloon that flew from South Korea. Any comments on that?
I have absolutely no way of commenting on that.
Okay.
Ms. Salome.
I believe Russia asked the Secretary General to brief today in the meeting on Zaporizhia. Why is he not?
Rosemary DiCarlo will be briefing, representing the Secretariat, which the Russian Federation is fully aware of. There was a scheduling issue. He will be there. He will be briefing tomorrow on basically reporting back on his trip, and then Rosemary DiCarlo will also brief on the broader situation in Ukraine.
I have a question not on Central America but North America. The Mexican president said yesterday that they were going to file a complaint against the UN on the failure by COVAX to deliver vaccines they had been promised. Today, he said that after he spoke, COVAX reached out to them and they are offering a number of doses. Have you been in touch with Mexico on this, and are you aware of similar problems in other countries?
No, from the Secretary General's office, no. I've no doubt the Mexican authorities have been in touch directly with our colleagues who manage the COVAX facility. I mean, I think the COVAX facility has done a tremendous job globally with extremely limited resources. We have talked about the underfunding of it for quite some time, but we very much hope that whatever issues they may have been or will be resolved quickly.
And a question on a different issue, if I may. There's local media reports about a diplomat accredited to the UN that was arrested over the weekend after being accused of rape, and he was released after claiming his diplomatic immunity. Has the UN been contacted by anyone, and are you taking any measures?
We're aware of this. We've seen the press reports. I think this is an issue having to do, as you said, not with I think there have been some early misreporting on it, not with anyone who is working for the United Nations, but a member of the diplomatic corps. I think any alleged rape or sexual assault needs to be fully investigated. This is a particular issue between the member state and the U.S. government, but we'll keep an eye on it. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. If there are no more questions. Oh, Iftikhar, sorry, you have a question.
Thank you, Steph. The United Nations have joined efforts by Pakistan to counter the floods. But now that more rains are threatening, do you have an update on that?
I do not have an update, but we can ask our country team. But I know the UN team in Pakistan is always ready and willing and able to support the authorities in Pakistan if requested to deal with any natural disaster. Okay, I will go get Yasmine. Great. Good afternoon again. We're delighted to be joined again by Yasmine Sherif, who is the head of Education Cannot Wait, and here to talk about your annual report. So please, you have the floor, and then we'll take some questions.
Yeah, it's on. Thank you very much, Stefan. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. Again, with Education Cannot Wait. You probably know us. We are the United Nations Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crises. And we are grateful here to be back at UNSG's noon briefing because, as you know, next month during UN General Assembly, the Secretary General is holding the conference, the Transformative Summit on Education, which is a major milestone for the United Nations. Now, Education Cannot Wait. As you know, we focus on children and youth in conflict, emergency, or forced displacement or climate-induced disasters. And today, we are excited to launch our report for the last year, 2021, titled, "We Have Promises to Keep and Miles to Go Before We Sleep," to paraphrase Robert Frost, because that's the reality. We have made promises through the Sustainable Development Goal 4 and through human rights conventions that every child, even if you are left furthest behind in conflict, in emergencies, climate-induced disaster, as a refugee, we promise them a quality education. Now, this report highlights the results for 1 year, what we have achieved. And I want to stress, when we speak about Education Cannot Wait as the UN's fund, we speak also for our great colleagues working for the High Commissioner for Refugees, for UNICEF, World Food Programme, for UNESCO, our great civil society organizations, Save the Children, Jesuit Refugee Service, Plan International, Norwegian Refugee Council, War Child, and many, many hundreds of local NGOs and civil society organizations, and of course, since we are in the UN, the member states that are providing the funding and the member states who are hosting us because they are affected by a crisis, such as the countries in the Sahel. We work very closely with all the ministers of education across the Sahel, Central African Republic, Chad, in South Sudan, in Colombia, in Yemen, and Syria, Iraq, and so forth. So we are all in this together, and everyone deserves a credit. Now, in this report, and this is what is interesting with this Education Cannot Wait, because we are building our model on the Secretary General's reform and common agenda, namely working together, joint programming, where we are many actors in one program and we provide a financial investment. In 1 year, we have reached 3.7 million children and adolescents who live in the darkest corners of the world, whether in militia-controlled areas of Central African Republic, whether they are in Syria, in the countryside, in Aleppo, or they are in Mali, Bamako, or in Chad, or in the Democratic Republic of Congo, even in Afghanistan. 3.7 million with a holistic quality education. That means we have reached those left furthest behind. In total, Education Cannot Wait, since we became operational in 2017, we have reached nearly 7 million children and youth. So if you see at the figures, 7 million since 2017, the past year 3.7 million. It means that we are accelerating and exponentially. And the number of children and youth reach are growing dramatically by the year. And this is possible because we are an entity in the UN and we are able to reach those left furthest behind, and we have a model that is proven by independent evaluations. We This was our best year for resource mobilization. As a global fund, we need the resources from private sector, member states of the United Nations, high net individuals. And this has been our best year, where we mobilized close to $390 million, which is a dramatic increase. And in total, our trust fund has now mobilized $1.1 billion, and through joint programming in country, through our member states who have missions in country, an additional $1 billion has been aligned with our programs. We are speaking about over $2 billion towards joint programming in education. Now, I will give you a few examples of what we have achieved, but let me give you some bad news. When Education Cannot Wait was established, they were estimated at the World Humanitarian Summit to work with the Humanitarian Development Nexus, humanitarian funding, development funding, because education is the development sector in a crisis context. There was an estimated 75 million children and youth. As a result of COVID-19, which has drawn us back decades, as a result of us today suffering the biggest refugee flows and displaced flows, forcibly displaced, since the Second World War, with over 100 million forcibly displaced around the globe, and as a result of conflicts being protracted, and we can look at Afghanistan and Syria, Cameroon, and so forth, we have gone from 75 million children and youth to the shocking number of 222 million. 222 million children and youth who are not only suffering from armed conflict and COVID-19 and forced displacement. On top of it, we've taken away from them the last hope, the access to a quality education. Because with that education, they can change their life. They can rebuild their life and that of their societies. So remember the figure of 222 million, and especially ahead of the UN Secretary General's Transforming Education Summit during UNGA this year. We got to give it our full force, support, and power. We stand behind, together with all our UN colleagues, donor colleagues, civil society colleagues, behind the Secretary General's groundbreaking summit. We got to make that a success this year. Now, out of the 222 million, there are 78.2 million children and youth in these very harsh circumstances of conflict that don't even go to school. They don't go to school. Okay, and then we have 119 million. Yeah, they go to something that may be called a school. They can't read and write. They can't do math. They can't even achieve the minimum competencies in mathematics or reading. So these figures must be a wake-up call for all of us. And
I couldn't get it.
Pardon?
I couldn't get it.
Iftikhar, your mic is open.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. But if you are reacting to the figures, I'm glad that we are moving and acting, because we will do so during the Secretary General Summit and continue to do so. Again, I want to stress that the education is the key for all sustainable development goals. And you know that the deadline is 2030. How can we, without education, achieve gender equality and extreme poverty? And it's also the key to achieve all human rights. If you don't have an education, how can you have a free and fair trial, freedom of expression, and so forth, or right to work? The education is the very foundation, and that's why it's so important that we give the SC Summit and this report and the work of all our colleagues the attention it deserves. As a follow-up to the SC's summit during UNGA, education cannot wait, and again you can read about our results in the report, but we are, the government of Switzerland are co-hosting, together with Education Cannot Wait, Education Cannot Wait's high-level financing conference in Geneva in February 2023. And co-conveners of this conference are the government of Germany, the government of Niger, the government of Norway, and the government of South Sudan. So please spread the news around the globe. We hope to have all the UN member states there, high net worth individuals and private sector, because we are also launching this year our new strategic plan 2023 to 2026, and our goal for the February conference is a minimum of $1.5 billion. Let me conclude with some highlights from the report. Again, here's the report, and you can all have a copy of it. So 3.7 million children and youth have been reached in 1 year alone. And again, we speak about across the Middle East, where you have conflicts and refugees, across sub-Saharan Africa, where you have conflicts and refugees and climate-induced disasters, the refugees coming from Venezuela to Colombia, Peru and Ecuador, and also Afghanistan and the Rohingyas in Bangladesh. 92% of all investments made, implemented by our colleagues, I mentioned the UN agencies and civil society and local communities and refugees themselves, 92% achieved data that demonstrate gender parity, that they improved the gender parity. It was not just the gender parity by number, but actually broke down the barriers towards girls' inclusion in education. We also saw an increased rate of completion of education. Previous years were 63%, this year 79%. So we see very dramatic changes happening in these investments. We also see we trained close to 30,000 teachers. And that training is very sophisticated. It's everything from science to math to literacy skills, but also mental health and psychosocial services. And we were able, through our partners, whom I mentioned, to ensure the holistic child-centered approach. Learning spaces, trained teachers, cash transfers that would allow parents who live in extreme poverty to send their children to school, school feeding programs. Many civil society organizations, World Food Program, play an instrumental role in that. Materials and textbooks, and what is so very important, mental health and psychosocial services, critically important when you are a child in crisis. And also, through many of our partners, UNICEF playing a major role, clean drinking water, safe sanitation facilities, and basic hand washing. But again, the worrying trend is that the number keeps growing. So even if we reach them, we reach more and more every year, the number keeps growing. And I just want to quote my colleagues from the humanitarian side of the UN, the Global Humanitarian Overview, that was issued in December 21. So last year there were an estimate of 235 million people that required humanitarian assistance, right? 235. For 2022, the Global Humanitarian Overview estimated 274 million. That's an increase of 40 million. And I'm giving these numbers to show that it's not getting any better. What we need to do today is to ensure that financial resources are made available to meet the needs. We also know that COVID-19 has played a huge role. I've spoken about the refugee crisis and the dramatic increase of forcibly displaced. So, and also that the funding appeals, as they are growing, the gaps in meeting the funding requirements are also growing. In 21, the appeals stood at 1.4 in 2020, in 21 in 2.9. So we speak about a double increase. So please help us get out to the word the need for financial investments, and everyone can contribute and must contribute. And I would like to give a conclusion, to give a thanks 2 member states, of course, all member states where we operate, whether it is in Cameroon or Central African Republic or in Iraq or in elsewhere, I mean across all Colombia, we work very closely with the Ministry of Education, and they are really welcoming this work. And amongst those who actually contribute with the huge contributions that can set an example for others to follow, I would like to mention Education Cannot Wait's 7 top donor contributors, and I really want to give them credit for this. Germany, that came in with almost $230 million in this year alone. United Kingdom, United States, Denmark, Norway, Canada, the European Commission, and among the private sector, I really want to give a lot of credit to the Lego Foundation. You know, we all played with Lego as children. So not only have they brought the creativity that we bring through Lego to children and youth in conflict, they are also coming with financial investments, hardware, finances. And I think that's an example for all private sector to follow. Together we can change the world. We can make sure that every child can reach their potential through a quality education, and we do not need to leave anyone behind. With that, I will end. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Edie Leonard?
Thank you very much. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A quick follow-up. The figures of 78 million children not going to school at all, and the 222 million who go to school and can't read or write, are those global figures or are those limited figures? Maybe you could answer that, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay. Should I? Yes, please. Thank you. It's a very important question. These figures are global figures, and I'll explain how they were developed. Global figures where for countries that are affected or context either by an armed conflict or by large refugee hosting countries, or where you had major climate-induced disasters. So these are the specific, the top humanitarian crises on the globe. Okay, how was it developed? So at Education Cannot Wait, developed by our global reporting team and monitoring and evaluation, and I would say led by Christian Stoff, who is not with us today, but on paternity leave, together working with an interagency group of UNICEF, UNHCR, UNESCO, and civil society organizations like Norwegian Refugee Council, International Rescue Committee, and others who endorse the findings. So it's a collective work. We did the research, and then it was vetted by the UN's inclusive of civil society expert group on statistics and data monitoring and evaluation. And that's the latest research to date.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. I had 2 questions. First, what are your expectations for the outcome of the Transforming Education Summit? And second, can Education Can't Wait do anything for girls in Afghanistan who are being deprived of going to secondary school?
Thank you very much. I think these are very good questions, and of course, I think all of us, including the Secretary General's special advisor for the Transforming Education Summit, Leonard, who is my friend? Garnier, Leonard Garnier. I'm sorry, Leonard. He's a wonderful human being. He's special advisor who is really leading these efforts and supported by the UN Special Envoy for Global Education, Gordon Brown, who will be launching an international finance facility to bring new transformative ways, led by many heads of agencies like Catherine Russell from UNICEF and UNESCO and others. I think we are all coordinated behind the Secretary General, and there's been a Transforming Education Summit in Paris that was organized by UNESCO in June. That was very, very inclusive and consultative, and I think the outcome of that summit gave us a big promise that if the political players in New York, the member states, can sort of ride on that inspiration and energy and intelligence and expertise that came out in Paris, this will be a very successful conference hosted by the Secretary General, meaning that the world and all the member states realize that education is the key. We have to ensure that skills of today are up to the skills required for 21st century, and that, of course, encompasses every child on the globe, that we ensure that the Secretary General's reform program and common agenda, our common agenda to leave no one behind, also zooms in on children in crisis and emergencies, and that the financing is made available. Yes, we can also speak about the technology that needs to be upgraded, curriculums needs to be upgraded, new skills are required for the 21st century. But as we all know, it costs money. We need financing. So we really hope that there will be a strong emphasis and generosity to make those commitments and dreams come true. But I can say that within the UN system, amongst those agencies and entities and civil society and host governments, there is great anticipation that the world will listen and take action.
Thank you.
And Afghanistan?
Yes. So Afghanistan, it's important, very important. I don't know if you know, and Stefan knows, because I spoke with you from Islamabad. So last year, of course, when there was a change into the new de facto authorities, the Taliban, we, Education Cannot Wait, joined forces with UNICEF and civil society organizations, and I led the first all-women mission to Afghanistan in October. We met with the Ministry of Education of Afghanistan and discussed the importance of continuing education for girls. And since then, of course, all girls are now permitted to go back to primary school, which is a shift from the early 2000s when no girl could go to school. However, we are less optimistic right now, since in March there was a ban for girls in secondary education to go back to school. And we have really shared our concerns with them, and it's more than just concern, because this is a right for every adolescent girl to go to school. We think that the Organization for Islamic Countries can play a major role, and many Muslim countries are today seeking to discuss the core of Islam, which is, if you open the Quran, it says read, and it means read for girls and read for boys. So we have to keep pushing the human right of every girl, including adolescent girls, to go to school in Afghanistan at secondary level. Meanwhile, we are working in Afghanistan through civil society and UN agencies, UNICEF playing a major role in implementing education investments at the local level in multiple provinces. So our programs have not been stopped. The Aga Khan Foundation has been in Afghanistan for decades, is still implementing, as is the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan. And I also want to point out that not all Taliban are against girls' secondary education. I have spoken, of course, informally as we do, because we have to engage, and there are those who want to see their own secondary girls or adolescent girls go to school. So it's important that we use those positive forces to support them.
Thank you, Betül.
Thank you. Here. Betül with the Turkish News Agency. Given the shocking numbers you just shared with us, and you said that it's not decreasing but increasing, how realistic or achievable is it to meet the goals in the field of education, or as you mentioned, gender parity, or putting these children or sending them back to school in such a short time to meet the goals by 2030? And you partly answered a question I wanted to ask. Edie asked it, but what concrete steps or commitments do you specifically want to see from the world leaders in September at this education summit? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Let us start with the realistic goal. What we have seen with Education Cannot Wait, and again, I need to stress that we are a platform, a fund, so it's the collective work, collective outcomes, joint programming with different UN agencies and civil society led by the host government's ministers of education. When everyone comes together through this kind of joint programming and there's no competition, you just come together and you have one program led by the Minister of Education. You have different UN agencies with their comparative advantage. You have all the civil society with their access, ability to go to grassroots level, and you have local communities, refugees and displaced, and children and youth themselves involved. You see what is possible if the funding is there. Take a place like Central African Republic, where you have 12 different militia groups. Through all these partners, we are able to reach them with diplomacy, trust, and good agencies and with society, and the host government working together, not in separation, together. Everything is possible. What is missing? Of course, if you have an active conflict where there is bombardment, you simply cannot reach because of security reasons. But let's say you have low intensity and you physically can reach there, or you can reach the refugee camps or the IDP camps. It's possible provided that the financing is available. It's possible, and we have proven that with the 3.7 million we reached this year because we had more money. The average, I would say, for the industrialized countries, and OECD DAC, for a child to go to school per year is about $10,000, $10,000. We are asking for $250 per child, and we don't even have that. If we can ensure a bit of redistribution, a bit more of giving from those of us who have, whether you're a government, high-net individual, or a private sector, and just redistribute, through our humanity and our generosity and wanting to contribute to the vision of the UN, we could meet it. I absolutely convinced we could meet the goals by 2030 when it comes to education for those left furthest behind. But it's the money, it's the finances.
Ephraim, and then we'll go to Majid.
Thanks very much. I remember we saw you last year from Islamabad airport, and you were basically told us about your fears for, Afghan girls and women, what's going to happen to education. So a quick follow-up on Edie's question, and it's a three-pronged question, but very short ones. When you share your concerns with the de facto authorities, how do they react? What do they tell you? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Also, can you elaborate a little more on the OIC role in promoting education and the thing you just mentioned? And my third question is, we saw after the fall of Kabul that the international community's posture was immediately, we're not going to deal with these authorities until we see improvement of human rights records. And of course, the women issue was in the front and center of what the world community considers as improvement of the Taliban rule. So my question is, what do you think, in retrospect, a year later, the effect of this international stance has been on particularly women and girls in Afghanistan. Has it helped? Has it not helped? And I know you don't talk politics, but on your day-to-day work, how did that affect you, think?
Thank you very much. Very good questions, actually comments also. Well, I'm not going to go into detail, but I can say that when we went to Kabul and we spoke with the Minister of Education, there was a clear agreement that children and youth and young girls up to the age of 18 deserve to go to school. So their starting point was, yes, we need to develop a plan and a system. So, of course, the follow-up question was, when will that plan be ready? It'll be ready soon. And then it looked as if we were moving towards that, right? And then suddenly there was a decision to ban in March, which took us all by surprise. From what I have seen speaking to them informally, as we all do in the UN, everyone does because you have to engage, which is very different from putting funding into their bank accounts or into the on-budget contributions. Very different. You still have to talk. There are those who want to resume education for secondary girls, and there are those who do not. So you have those who are educated, who are aware, who feel that sense of humanity that sort of binds every religion, doesn't matter what religion, the golden rule and the humanity that comes with any religion, whether it's Islam or another religion, world religion, they understand it from their heart, that of course my daughter should go to school. And then there are those who may not understand even their own religion. It depends who interprets, okay? It's an interpretation issue. Sometimes it has to do with lack of education. It has to do with lack of tolerance. It may have to do with many different reasons. So there's an internal struggle there, okay? That's not politics. That's a human behavior. It's an internal struggle. So that's what we gather. And we know that there are some really principled and strong people there who really want to see girls returning to secondary school, who almost cry when you speak with them. And then there are those who are less emotive about it and may not feel that same desire. And on the role of the Organization of Islamic Countries, I mean, of course, their role is to work across the Islamic world and find commonalities and common interest and they can play an instrumental role, especially if the de facto authorities define themselves on a religious basis. The Islamic Emirate, the Organization for Islamic States, then naturally would be a useful partner, right? So let us hope, because there is no Muslim country today in the world where secondary girls do not go to school except Afghanistan. Secondary girls go to school in every Muslim country. They are holding leadership positions. They are going to universities. Women in the Muslim world play instrumental, intellectual, scientific roles. So, and there are over 1 billion Muslims around the globe. It's important that their voice is heard and that their perspectives are shared with the de facto authorities in Afghanistan, because after all, in Islam, everyone is it's a brotherhood and sisterhood, if I may add that. So it should be fair to listen to the Organization of Islamic States. They have a lot to share. Now, how do we deal with them? It is very important that we don't abandon Afghanistan, that is on an absolutely terrifying brink of humanitarian catastrophe. Actually, they are in a catastrophe already. When you are so poor that you have to sell your child to feed your family, when drug addictions have increased, when the poverty, they don't even have money to go to the hospital, but they have to die or let their children die or sell their children. This is so not Afghan, and I've lived and worked there. And OCHA and UNHCR and UNICEF, and I mean everyone is calling for attention to Afghanistan's humanitarian catastrophe. And the humanitarian imperative is not to be politically aligned or have anything to do with national budgets or provide resources to the government or ad hoc government. It's about delivering humanitarian assistance. And that is the position of the United Nations civil society. I think UNICEF, as soon as the takeover happened, they were the first, and the Secretary General and others, the UN will stay to deliver. And the UN is there and delivering again, but it goes direct execution to the vulnerable population. And again, we need to tell the world there is one thing to provide on-budget contributions. If you don't do that, because it's a de facto government, it's not being recognized, but there is a population and they are suffering, and they have suffered for 40 years. Don't turn your back on Afghanistan. It's heartbreaking. So yes, we need to hold the flag for Afghanistan's people, the mothers, the fathers, the children, the girls, and the right to basics. And they are now on the brink of starvation. It's horrible.
Majid, all the way in the back.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you so much for this briefing. My name is Majid Ghali, Rudal Media Network. I have two questions. The first one is about how you decide to help certain schools and certain education institutions regarding their curriculum. Especially there are certain schools in certain parts of the world that teaches things that are contrary to the human rights principle, or they have outright very sexist or racist curriculums. And do you have any ability to scan this, and is there any certain standards with that regard? And the second one is about girls who are victims of sexual violence during conflict, especially I'm talking about the Yazidis. There are now tens of thousands of Yazidi women victims of ISIS that are in the camps that especially are excluded from education for many reasons. And their situation in Iraq especially is still very bad, and they have lack of education, access to regular education, but they're also in need of psychiatric help and special kind of aid. Is there any special grants for them and by the United Nations in general? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, and again, in every one of these countries where we operate, you will have very strong, long-standing UNICEF officers, Save the Children. We have big refugees populations hosted. You have the High Commissioner for Refugees. You have UNESCO. You have World Food Program. You have Norwegian Refugee Council, UNDP, and so forth, and who have worked with the host government for many, many years. And in the education sector, they worked with the education ministry for many years. So they are the ones that work with them on curriculum, on making sure that, of course, the principles of the United Nations and the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration for Human Rights are not being contradicted. UNRWA is another example. So they are out there, and they've been there for decades. So they do it. It's not us as a fund, but we rely on them. So that's number one, and that's very important. And I just give another example, for instance, sometimes I lose my words, but corporal punishment, for instance. There's nothing worse you can do to a child than to beat them during the formative years. And these are things that we are now taking safeguarding. And we keep track on all of that. We keep track on if schools are in any way abusing the children, in any way the teachers are abusing them, pupils are abusing them, or organizations abusing them. So we work together with these partners on the ground, and we keep a very strong monitoring, I would say monitoring insight and supervision over what's taking place. And then, of course, we support the curriculums that helps move towards peace building, peacemaking, human rights, ethics, and universal ethics and universal moral values that we find in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. Now, when it comes to for instance, sexual violence, which is very, very common in all of these countries, sexual violence has become a means of warfare. You mentioned, ISIS and Syria and Iraq, and I was just meeting with the colleagues and Dr. Mukebe from DRC the other week. We see it across Eastern DRC. We see it in most of these countries. It's a means of warfare. If you can destroy it through sexual violence, you break down communities, right? So education can, I don't want to, over-promise, but it can play a protective role. If girls go to schools that are protected, and often you need to have walls around those schools, and they can go to school every day, they will not be exposed to trafficking. They will have a chance to access mental health and psychosocial services. If we have schools, and this is what we stand for, that have sanitation for them, have separate restrooms for them, and where you also integrate gender equality in the curriculum, where the teachers are trained to teach young boys to respect girls, and girls also to be leaders and make the right choices rather than being forced by the parents to get married at age 13 and so forth. So education has a protection function as well. Once you bring young girls into a school, the likelihood of them being the subject of victims of trafficking, sexual violence, actually reduces significantly. And you give them access to mental health and psychosocial services should they have been traumatized or fear that they might be the victims. So education is more than math and reading. It's also to create that protective learning environment for girls and also boys that can be subjected to sexual violence. So it covers many, more than, we must never look at education as just one little goal there. It actually is the only place where a child or a young person in a conflict can go and feel safe, provided that we invest sufficiently financial means.
Great, thank you. We'll take one last question online. Juliet Morrison. Juliet?
Hi, yes, I'm Juliet Morrison for IPS. You mentioned that Education Cannot Wait provides psychosocial support for children in conflict-afflicted areas. Could you get into the support and talk about what it looks like and what helps children?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll give you some examples of what it looks, real example of what it looks like. But let me first say, it means, first of all, that we train and provide psychosocial services. First, we provide psychosocial services to the teachers, because they themselves are often victims of the conflict or the forced displacement themselves. For them to be mentors and strong, we have to ensure that they have mental health and psychosocial services. Then, through them, also to the teachers. It means providing psychologists in the school, like we all have in schools. There is a school psychologist, there are curriculum and material where children can play, draw, talk about their experiences, have sort of therapeutic treatments or sessions together. They sit around, they speak about, maybe not about the experience itself, but they make drawings. Often you see drawings about wars, and after having gone to school and received the psychosocial support, you will see the war drawings shifting towards flowers and a happy family. I've seen Rohingya refugee children in the Cox's Bazar when they arrived from Myanmar, and their eyes were hollow and they were all shattered and traumatized from what they had experienced in that forest as they crossed the border. And then 1 year later, with psychosocial services and all the different pedagogic material and psychologists, how they were coming out of that shell and they were shining. Not only were they able to express themselves and the trauma through different exercises and that support, but they were also performing better academically. So yes, it takes many different forms, but we try to standardize it so that there is expertise, material, exercises, embedded in one package, and that's available in every investment. It has to be available in every investment that we have. And again, we are dealing with deeply traumatized children and young people. You can just imagine the excruciating pain of losing your family, dispossessed, running from villages that are on fire, the sexual violence, rapes, seeing your mother raped, maybe being amputated, having your hands chopped off. And you know, the human misery out there is it's so much beyond what we can imagine that the least we can do, if we can't imagine it, is to use our financial resources at least to remove it.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.